So when I was growing up, my parents didn't vote, actually. Now, it wasn't because they didn't care or didn't want to. They read the papers. They had deeply held views that they passed on to me. They were active in the community and in their unions. They didn't vote because they couldn't. They were immigrants with green cards. And I, as the youngest child of immigrants, was the first voter in my family. It wasn't until years after I started voting at 18 that my parents became citizens and got the right to vote. Now, what I want to tell you is about how much they love to vote, how much they delight in it, how much they revel in it. They're in their 70s now, and they still wake up very, very early, like 6:30 at the crack of dawn, to vote on election day. In fact, my mother now volunteers as a poll watcher. And they have this excitement like kids on Christmas morning around voting, and they vote in every single election. Because when you don't have something so vital, that's when you know how deeply you need it. That's how you really truly value something often, when you don't have it, when it's beyond your reach. And just take, for example, food. If you don't drink water for a few days, you'll know how essential water is for life. If you hold your breath even for a few minutes, you'll realize how precious the air we breathe every day is. So what does that have to do with WFP? If I had to sum up what the Working Families Party is in 2 words, I would use the 2 words radical democracy. And both of those words are important, radical and democracy. And what does it mean when we put them together? See, democracy doesn't just mean the right to vote. It means the right to control your life, self-determination. It means workers deciding together how it's going to be at work. A union is democracy. It means communities, not just developers, deciding whether we need new luxury housing or affordable housing. It means the people shall rule, all power to the people. And it's why I'm an organizer, because coming together across difference to make common cause and fight for collective interest, democracy, it's also called many things. Some people call that solidarity, some call it love. It's also truly democracy in action. Us organizing is truly how we manifest our democracy. That's why I invite you to come together with me in the Working Families Party, so that we could see each other, recognize each other, connect with each other, heart to heart, around the most intimate and sacred thing imaginable, the future of our families and our communities. It was my parents who couldn't vote, who raised me to know and love democracy, to love the promise of democracy, even when what passes for democracy in our nation still leaves you parched. And if you're on this call, you know our nation's history. Democracy always has been a promise, but a promise always unfulfilled. In the revolutionary moment of our nation's independence, who could vote in our new nation rooted in freedom and democracy? Who? Property-owning white men. Later, white men with property were allowed to participate. After the Civil War ended and after slavery was abolished, Black men technically could vote. And during that very, very small period of history called Reconstruction, many Black men did vote and did participate in their democracy. But then racialized terror snuffed that democracy. And for almost a century, most Black folks couldn't access our democracy. Now, women could vote starting in 1890 in Wyoming, and then eventually 1920 across the country. Except in the South, Black women really couldn't vote any more than Black men could. So not many people know this, but many Native Americans didn't get citizenship and the right to vote until the 1920s. And many Chinese immigrants couldn't become citizens until the 1940s. And the Voting Rights Act passed in Congress in 1965. That's in some of our lifetimes. Just a decade before my parents came from Grenada and Trinidad in the Caribbean to Long Island in New York. Every step on expanding the franchise is taking bravery, struggle, and deep and painful sacrifice. Sometimes people sacrifice with their lives. Often people sacrifice with their lives. It has been motivated by activists demanding the impossible in organizing. That's how our democracy has expanded, even as our democracy still hasn't been realized. It's easy to look at that history and assume we're in a process, an inevitable process, although slow, of becoming a truer and truer democracy. But progress is never assured, never certain, and never made without intense struggle. A study from professors at Princeton and Northwestern University a few years back showed that the opinions of ordinary Americans have effectively no impact on laws made in Congress. Only the opinions of the wealthy, only elite opinions impact Congress. That's not what a democracy should look like. It was just a few years ago that the Supreme Court overturned parts of the Voting Rights Act. It's been a part of a coordinated attempt to roll back voting rights, along with dozens or maybe hundreds of actions taken by Republican state legislatures, from voter ID laws to gerrymandered districts to closing polling places in communities of color. Some of those people, I believe, want very much to go back to a time when only property-owning white folks could vote. My parents taught me to bring everything I have to the struggle for justice. My passion, my brains and intellect, my energy. When I travel around the country meeting with WFP members and leaders, it takes a toll on my body naturally. I've done almost 100 trips in a few months. It's time away from my 2-year-old son, my precious boy. And I do it because I know it's the only way to build the world he deserves. I think we have a duty to fight for democracy, to fight for self-determination, a democracy that includes all of us, because ultimately, I truly believe the people shall rule.